We're going to start now our next Intramuros learning sessions. So good morning, everyone.
Hi, good
Welcome
morning,
to,
Ramil.
Michael, good morning. Okay, so, wait. Okay, so good morning, everyone. Welcome to Intramuros learning sessions hosted by the Intramuros administration. For today's topic, we will try to answer the question, did the Mudéjar style make it to the Philippines? Originating in Spain, the Mudéjar is often loosely described as an Islamic style for a Christian market. But more than just producing breathtaking patterns, the artistic and architectural current also had a more practical structural appeal. This short introduction brings to light a mostly overlooked style that could have existed in Philippine architecture during the Spanish colonial period. About the presenter, architect Michael Manalo, or Miko as we call him, is a conservation architect and a licensed thermographer. He graduated from the University of Santo Tomas with a degree in architecture and was subsequently sent to Mexico City through a grant from the National Commission for Culture and the Arts and the Mexican government. This is where he obtained his master's degree in Built Heritage Conservation from the National School of Conservation in Mexico City. Architect Miko was the project director of Escuela Taller in Intramuros from 2008 to 2013 and a member of the Philippine delegation to the World Heritage Committee meetings from 2012 to 2015. He is currently the head of NCCA's Committee on Monuments and Sites and currently leading several conservation projects nationwide. Let us all welcome architect Miko Manalo.
Thanks, Ramil. Hi, guys. Hi, everyone. And happy quarantine morning. I don't know what day it is today, but it's good to have everybody here. I'm broadcasting from the house, and sorry you can't see me because I don't want to go from the slides to live because of technical problems. So anyway, just to cut to the chase, our learning sessions today explore the Mudejar style, and if it did make it to the Philippines. Just a short backgrounder and a bit of a story. This was something that came out in the early 2000s. So when I came home from my studies in Mexico in 2002, I immediately set forth to work, and there were some things that we observed in one of the sites, particularly in Ilocos, that sort of reminded me of this style of the Mudéjar. So it was the beginning of this exploration into a possible link of the Philippines to a style that would have originated in Spain. So, okay, let's move on to the first slide. I'd like you to just to read it. It says in English, "What is Gina doing?" And then for you who know Spanish, well, it's translated to "¿Qué está haciendo Gina?" But in Chabacano of Zamboanga, it's read as "Cosa ta hace si Gina." And then in Chabacano of Cavite, it's "Cosa ta si si Gina." "Cosa ta si Gina." So you see that there is something going on from Spanish to Chabacano to Chabacano of Zamboanga and Chabacano of Cavite. There are certain linguistic patterns, but there are also nuances. But nothing can be as perplexing as probably the next slide, which is it was penned by somebody from Cavite. So if you read it, you understand parts. If you understand Spanish, you understand parts of it. If you understand some Filipino dialects, you kind of get some of it. But it's really funny because the end of it, he just says, "Gracias for signing my guest book." and the link of the web page in honor of Nuestra Señora de la Soledad de Portavaga. Aquel Dumas, muchas gracias otra vez. So it's interesting because it already shows you that everything is mixing. And this is exactly how cultures happen. It's the mixing, it's the confluence of things. And this is actually also what the Mudéjar is. It's a confluence of things, right? So here in the next slide, we have what appears to be something very, very Moorish, highly Moorish, but was produced under the patronage of a Christian king, Pedro I of Castile. So this is one of the palaces that Pedro built in the late 14th century and was converted into a monastery. So it became a royal monastery of Santa Rosa in Tordesillas. And you can see here that almost nothing tells you that it is a Christian site. Almost everything in this photo just exudes Moorish. So that's why the Mudéjar, as a lot of people would say, is a Christian art, a Muslim art for a Christian audience or for Christian patrons. I'm sorry, but the slides were flattened and the slides were compressed. There would have been much more underneath these photos, but I'll just discuss the two photos that are in front. So both of them are actually from churches, and you could see how the Moorish and the Christian elements, particularly Gothic elements, are mixing already. So you have in this, the photo to the left, you have an entrance with a beautiful horseshoe arch, which is framed by two slender, very Gothic capitals and surmounted by corbels of very Gothic appearance. And then on the right, you would have a lancet arch window, but within it is very Islamic plasterwork. So you already have that mixing of styles and of tastes. And surrounding it, you would have like a faux brick painted over the plasterwork. So let's just look at what the salient materials and technologies exist. So you do have plaster work. So sorry again, the slides are were compressed. So we have all of the photos sort of jumbled up. But here you can see on the in the background, you see a flat plaster which had been scored and painted over. So you do have something like that. And then on the right side, this is a synagogue from Cordoba. You do have that characteristic Moorish plasterwork, very typical of the caliphates in Spain at the end of the 13th to 14th centuries. So you do have this this highly Islamic style going on. And if you do go to centers of Muslim art, this plasterwork becomes an explosion of geometries and of patterns. We have to bear in mind that in the Muslim religion, the representation of the human form is highly forbidden. So in their arts, most of their arts are mostly geometric patterns or vegetal forms, which we see here. Now, this is from that palace of Pedro I again. So you can see a polylobed arch enclosing a door, a doorway or a window, but then around it, around the arch, you'd have a flat plaster. And then you'd have on the two sides, you'd have bishops, no? So with the Eucharist. What a strange mix already, right? Something so Moorish with very, very Christian elements. But then if you look at the central portion, you have in relief Arabic script, but then flanking the doors are very Western clothed people, right? So you'd already have this mixing, but most of it done in plaster. And then you would have, of course, the tiles. So this is one of the facades of the church, and you could see how the tiles are interspersed between the brickwork, but how vivid the tiles come out, right? So this is also very characteristic of the Mudéjar style, the use of tiles in architecture. But probably what is most notable in the Mudéjar style and what could so easily be transplanted would be the woodwork, so the carpentry. Pardon again, as most of the slides are compressed, so you can only see two, uh, two photos of two churches in Spain. But there would have been other photos underneath it. But I'll just scroll down to the others, to the other slides, just to show you how this carpentry technology comes about. So you do have what is on your right side a very simple rafter construction. So in a Mudéjar glossary, it would be called par hilera. So the hilera is the one at the central point at the tip, and then a par would be a rafter. It is also called alfarda. So you'd have it there, and then those rafters or the pares would rest on an estribo. So you can read it there. But then on the left side, you'd have a slight variation to that because what they did was to add the nudillo, which in English would be roughly the equivalent of a top chord, a collar, sorry, a collar, and then you'd have another structural member, which is horizontal, the tirante. This is on the lower portion, and it connects the two estribos on both sides of the space, right? So the estribos would be on top of the walls, and this would sort of prevent the wall from opening up. Because if you look at the photo again, the illustration on the right, you would have arrows pointing out of the walls. So this is how the movement would be. Because the rafters would push down into the walls would easily open up. So the photo on the diagram on the left, the illustration on the left, sort of addresses that with two horizontal members, the nudillo and the tirante, the collar and the bottom chord. So let's look at this. If you put all of those elements together, you might come up with a very, very spectacular space, just like this one, which is the Hall of the Ambassadors in the Alcázar of Seville. The Alcázar is a fantastic complex of buildings, but a lot of the very high Mudéjar portions belong to the area that was constructed also by Pedro I of Castile. But not a lot of the examples, not only in Spain, but also outside of Spain, would be this loaded with ornament, or this grand. Some of them would be more subdued. So let's take a look. Like for example, this one. This is in the Canary Islands. So you would have a Mudéjar ceiling, but none of the geometry. You can see that there is the form. So you have the form, the structural form, but the decoration is not of that Islamic geometric patterns. No, that's already very floral. This is in the Canary Islands, and this is pretty late. This is already in the 16th century. This is in the Cathedral of Teruel. And what is interesting is that you have here both the geometry of the lacework and the paint. So you already have that mix of vivid colors, highly figurative ornamentation, and also very Moorish geometries happening. So this is the long view of the nave of the cathedral in Teruel. And some of the illustrations are depicting construction work. So it's possible that they actually depicted how the building was constructed. So this portion shows you the construction of the roof. And the second part of that series, you would have the second frame, you'd actually have that A sort of frame of the roof with the two rafters and the collar tie, right? So you'd have that collar tie there forming sort of like a letter A. Now, what is this? You have two writings from two different periods artistically. So in the left, you would have an excerpt from a construction treatise from the 17th century. This is from the architectural treatise of Diego Lopez de Arenas. And then on the right side, you would have an older manuscript from the Gothic period. This is from Villard de Hononcourt. So what do you see? What are the commonalities here? A lot of them rely on geometry. And what do you see as something very common to the left and the right side of this screen? If you look at the left, what is prominent is the compass. And if you look on the right side, on the upper left part of the right side, you'd have an inverted compass. What does this tell us? Everything back then was based on geometry. So geometry for the builders back then meant so much. There were not a lot of calculations, but most of them would rely on very solid geometries, which is why a lot of these manuscripts and treatises would always have as a backbone descriptive geometry. So the one on your right, the Gothic one, is before the formalization of the theories on descriptive geometry, while the one on your left, which is from the 17th century, already has most of those theories in place, right? So what is interesting is that if you go to the right side of the screen and you look at all of these shapes that are inscribed into a horse's head, a human head, there are squares, triangles. There are stars. Actually, you see two stars there, one inscribed into somebody's face and one inscribed into an eagle. And then you have on the upper left side of that photo, the drawing of a, uh, a building. Well, it's a highly imaginative building, but how the illustrator wanted to put these geometries, to apply these geometries into a building scheme. So what he sees as perfect for the human body, the body of an animal, or even plants, it sees as perfect also for buildings. So that is a big role of geometry back then. Now, the next slide goes to the New World, right? Why did we talk of all of those geometries, all of those writings, and then we jump to the New World? So you do know that that Spain had launched its conquest of the New World of America in the late 15th century, and it just reached its peak in the 16th century. But the reason that we talked about treatises and manuscripts is just to tell you one thing. It tells you that a lot of this knowledge is being passed on, right? So if not for these writings, then they wouldn't be passed on from one builder to the next. But more important than the writings would be the guilds, or what they call the gremios in Spanish. So the guilds would play a very big role in the transfer of technologies from one place to the next. So you can imagine looking looking at buildings in Spain and transferring everything from Spain to the New World, which is an ocean away. Then you'd have to have like all of that knowledge intact for you to come out with these wonderful buildings and wonderful new interpretations. Like this one, for example, in Lima, in Peru. This is the Casa de Torre Tagle, which has this beautiful set of balconies in the Mudéjar style, or a church in Bolivia, which has a wonderful Mudéjar ceiling and roof over it. And then you would have these examples in Mexico. The right side shows you the Church of San Francisco in Tlaxcala, and then the left side would show you another manuscript. So this one was drawn by Fray Andrés de San Miguel in Mexico. So you would have another writing from the 17th century already laying down the sort of rules, geometric rules on the construction of these beautiful carpentry works. And then you'd have the Philippines. So it's a big jump, I know, but we also don't want uh, to to like keep the discussion very long. So this, I must say that this is actually why this is actually the reason why this entire interest in the Mudéjar came out. So in the mid 2000s, this was being renovated, and if you can see the roof, right? If you can see, there's no ceiling, and it has the truss work exposed. So I think the next slide shows it better. So here it has it better. The sad part about this photo is that none of this magnificent roof exists today. So all of it was taken down, and it was replaced by a steel, a series of steel trusses to hold the new roof up. But here you have roughly about 400 plus pieces of logs, so rounded wooden members stuck together. And this is without the aid of like a crane or heavy machinery. You can just imagine how everything was put up. So, but you do have that characteristic A-shaped frame going on, which rests on the two walls. You don't have the bottom cord, right? That would link the estribos on both walls, above both walls. But you would have the nudillo which is the collar tie, which forms like that A shape. This is also the same in the parish church of Santa Monica in Sarat. So this happily is still there. It was slightly damaged in an earthquake way back in the 80s, but you do see it much more clearly here that you do have that rafter construction and the additional support of the collar tie, right? That would sort of prevent that outward thrust of the rafters. But despite that, if you can see, the walls are still sort of slanting out. So this is sort of why you would have a lot of these Ilocos churches with the characteristic buttresses. So they would have these massive, massive buttresses that would just counteract that force, that push towards the outside, right, towards the exterior, and you would have the walls already leaning out because they had already leaned out before the buttresses were put in. So the buttresses were actually just introduced much later, after a lot of these experimentations on these buildings happened, right? So here's a much clearer view of that. So you would see the rafters and the collar tie right there, linking the pairs of rafters together. The Ilocano churches are much more of an overkill because not a lot of the examples would have like a forest of wood on top of the nave, but this is just very, very exaggerated. But I'd like to bring your attention to the top part of the walls. So if you can see right there, you'd have sort of shorter wooden members jutting out. So these would be the ones that would hold, that would fasten that estribo on top of the wall, that wooden beam lining the whole length of the wall. That would just fasten it in place. So it would span the entire width of the wall. It sort of is the same as, for example, this. This is a cleaner version of a ceiling. This is in Oaxaca, in Mexico. So you would just see a very clean set of rafters and collar ties, but with the tirante, or the bottom cord, holding the two estribos together, and that would have some kind of geometric lacework, but not very, very fantastically developed. So this would sort of give us perspective on what we're trying to look at, right? So we're trying to look at more of the structure and less of the ornamentation in the Mudéjar that actually appeared in the Philippines. It is very much contrasting with something like this, right? So this is a construction in the Oriental style. Now, if we really think about it, a lot of our craftsmen trained to do work on the buildings would be Chinese at that point in time. So if they were Chinese, would they have transported also, would they have brought in their knowledge of construction in the buildings here in the Philippines? Would they have introduced it? In some points, yes, but not on the whole, because as you can see here, the building construction and how to develop a roof in the Chinese manner for monumental constructions is more of a post and lintel system. It's not a rafter system. So you have posts, verticals, and then you have lintels, horizontals. And then you would have those in diminishing spans stacked up on top of each other, and that would be the one that gives you that 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 the shape of the roof, right? So you have something like this, right? So posts and then beams, right? So it's post and beam construction. There are hardly any horizontal ones except for the ones holding the tiles, which is in stark contrast to this. So this is in Cordoba, in Spain. So you would actually have a Mudéjar style roof, but this is already covering a structure of 3 naves, right? So you'd have the central nave and 2 more naves, 2 more aisles flanking it on the sides. And you can see that the rafters are sort of extended out beyond the main supports in the in the center. So you'd have here a Philippine interpretation, possibly a Philippine interpretation of that. So this doesn't exist anymore. This was in Pangasinan, and this was taken after the earthquake of 1892. So it shows you more or less the same configuration. It has 3 naves, it has 3 corridors in plain parlance, but then you would have that basic structure, right? The rafter structure, and it extends out into the outer naves. But here also, it's very clear. You can see the bottom chords holding the tops, the estribos on top of the posts. And then from there, you'd have the pares, no? The rafters. And then you'd have the collar tie, which forms that horizontal space on top. So here you have the Camarín de la Virgen de los Desamparados. This is in Santa Ana, in Manila. So construction of this church began in 1720. So it's already very late by the standards of Spain, because by this time in Europe, you'd already have like a gradual shunning of the Baroque and a move towards more academic style, more neoclassical style. But this church is very, very Baroque. But you would have a ceiling in the camarin. The camarin is the space, it's a small room at the back of the main altar on the second floor. And if you can see the photo, you have an altar surmounted by a huge crown covered in silver. And beyond that, that houses the image of the Virgin, Nuestra Señora de los Desamparados, now the Lady of the Abandoned. And so you look out, yes, then the room is open to the public. Yes, you can visit it. So if you stand on top of that, in front of that altar, you can actually see the back of the Virgin. And if you just stand on tiptoe, you can see out into the nave of the church. So you can see everybody hearing Mass. But the purpose of this room also is it is sort of where the Virgin would change her clothes. So hence the name Camerino or Camerin. It's her dressing room. So it's the Virgin's dressing area. So, oh, I lost the slide. Sorry, because there's a slide that would have juxtaposed this with a Spanish variant, the one that you saw in the very beginning. So I'll just show it to you again. So let's look at this in detail. So if you see it, you see the end, it's chamfered, right? So there are diagonals in the end, these. So there are diagonals right there. So that is something. So this portion here. So that is something that also appears in a lot of ceilings in Latin America and in Spain. And if you can remember, one of our earlier discussions, let me just go back to that. Oops, I don't know how to take that out. How do you clear that? There you go. Oops, sorry. So let's go back to one of our earlier examples. Sorry for those who have sort of like vertigo or something. Very sorry to subject you to this. So there you go. There you go. The one in the Canary Islands, the one that is beautifully, gorgeously painted with all of this foliage. So you can see the same form. So it actually has how many sides, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So it has 8 sides, and then all of that is painted. So when you go back to the Philippine example, let's go back to, there you go. So it's the same 8 sides, and it's of course the decoration is very, very different, but you'd also see that there is this flat area right here, right here. So that flat area would be where the collar tie would be, and all of these wooden planks would be attached to the collar ties. And then in the diagonal areas where you would have the rendering of the baptism and the others, that would be where um, the the rafters are. So it's supposed to be nailed to the rafters, right? So next we have another another example. This is the provincial house of the Jesuit order in Cebu, in Parian. So this was built in 1730 as suggested by an inscription inside. What is interesting, oh, sorry, it all got compressed. So I don't think you can see it. What is interesting is if you look at the form of the roof, it has a very Western tile, right? The shape of the tile is very Western, but the ridge sports that flare on both ends, which gives it very Chinese feel, very Oriental flavor to it. And also the corners have a flaring to the ends. So this Oriental silhouette has that same carpentry pattern happening underneath it. So you still have an A-frame, none of the post and lintel type of construction found in a lot of the Oriental examples of roofs, right? Um, so I lost another slide. Apparently I lost so many slides. Sorry, but this one, so if you look closely, this is not in the Parian. This is not in the Jesuit house. This one is in Boljoon in Cebu, right? So in Boljoon, you would have outside of the church, you'd have what they refer to as a block house. So the block house houses the bells, but it also is where they had incarcerated people in the 19th century. So the block house was actually finished in 1805, right? But if you look closely, you'd see a number. So you would see the number 6 on the horizontal part. I don't know if everybody sees it, but it's right there at the joint of this ensemble, right? So you would have the number 6. What does this tell us? So what this is telling us is that you can actually, because of very clear instructions, what we saw earlier in the manuscripts and the treatises, because of very clear instructions, you would actually have a means of prefabricating everything, right, on the ground, and then going up to where you have the roof and just assembling it like a gigantic jigsaw puzzle. So it's that means that that this technology affords us, right? Um, okay, I'll try to do something. I'll try to show you the slides in another screen, and of course you're all gonna see me. Uh, so I'll try to move from this screen to another screen, so you could catch a glimpse of what I'm trying to tell you. So bear with me. I'll just switch from one screen to the other. Uh, I don't know if you can see it, but okay. So I hope you guys are seeing this. This is that church in Spain that I was telling you about. And then this one is the interior of that church in Mangaldan in Pangasinan. So you can see the similarities between the two, right? So this gives it a little bit more perspective. So now you can see the slide of the church in Santa Ana, the Camarin of the Virgin. And the next slide would show you that ceiling juxtaposed with the other ceiling of the one in Spain. So you would have more or less the same forms with the same underlying structure, with the same carpentry tradition that was transplanted from Spain to the New World and probably to the Philippines, right? So this is the one of the Jesuit house of 1730. And here you can see that roof that I was talking to you about. And you can see those, the flaring ends of the roof ridge, right? So it belies a very, very Western construction underneath. And it's interesting because underneath it also, you'd have ornamentations such as this. So you have a sort of carpentry tradition in the Mudéjar style, but already incorporating Baroque or Rococo elements that were very popular, especially in Cebu, where this example exists. So these are the other components of that roof, right? So another example is this one. This is the Church of Betis in Pampanga. And inside you would have the glorious interiors of Betis. I'm sure everybody is very is very familiar with Betis, right? So you would have that, and then underneath you would have all of this happening. So you would have a ceiling that has this underlying structure that also has sort of the same construction. So you have those rafters and also the top and bottom cord. So the collar tie, and also the bottom cord, which is more or less similar to what we have in the Paraninfo in Alcalá de Henares in the university, right? So you would have a ceiling placed underneath the bottom cord. So you don't see the bottom cord, and you don't have that form, that sort of A-frame form when you look at it from underneath. So here again is is the structural form as a diagram. And then we'd have this. This was actually sort of a breakthrough for this study. This is in Boljoon in Cebu. And then this is how a lot of people would see it today, but this photo was taken in the early 2000s in an earlier visit. So you would have actually a false barrel vault, and then you'd have jutting out of it those bottom chords, the tirantes, and then you'd have those corbels jutting out also from the sides, right? So those are the ones holding, fastening the estribo in place. But it's interesting because we also got hold through the National Commission for Culture and the Arts. We got hold of documentation that a German team had made also in the early 2000s of how this entire roof system was made and how the barrel, false barrel, was also constructed, right? But there was also a link to this. So this one, thanks to Professor Ricky Jose in the archives of the University of Santo Tomas, and also thanks to Father Galende, who was with the San Agustin Museum, we see this. So this is from the manual of Juan del Barran from the early 18th century, and it shows you the construction of a building in Cebu. In particular, this is sort of like the manual for the construction of the convent in the Santo Niño Basilica. So it shows you the walls of the building, and then it shows you the structural framing of the roof. But what it also shows you is how you geometrically get everything. So it is circumscribed into circles, and then you would have series of triangles also. And you'd have these letters and these numbers, and those correspond to instructions written instructions contained in the manuals. And what is interesting is that the vocabulary, the parlance, the glossary that of words that is contained in this treatise, in this manual, this manuscript, is the same language that is used in Latin America and in Spain and the Iberian Peninsula. But we went a little further. We tried to superimpose it. So what we got was this. So it was pretty freaky when it was superimposed. We did know that the drawing for the manual was for another building, but when we had superimposed it onto this building in Boljoon, it was almost an actual fit. So again, let's do that again. So you have this as your drawing from the early 2000s, and then you have this as your drawing from a manual from the early 1700s, and then you superimpose it. You have the tip corresponding to that. You have the walls corresponding. Everything is almost a fit. So this tells you that there is, or there was, a standard for building, that people actually shared information. So this is what we were discussing earlier about having information travel, right? I'm very sure at one point in your lives, you did that exercise where you were all made to stand in line, and then somebody would whisper a sentence to the first person, and that person will whisper it to the next. And when it gets to the 20th person, it would be probably the same, but in a different wording, using different semantics and stuff like that. So you'd have that happening also here in the Philippines, right? That you would have the information, but the information may not be complete or may have been enriched with an overlay of like more local traditions. So here we have everything in Rococo, right? In that splendid Baroque of Cebu. I'll just breeze through these slides just to show you that this was already sort of like the flavor in the 18th century when a lot of these buildings were built actually. Uh, and then you'd have them also in prints, but what you'd have are signed prints by local artists already. So you'd have Filipinos interpreting very Western styles already. So this would also include everything in liturgical art and also domestic construction. You'd also have the transplanting of cultures, like for example, a devotion to a Black Christ. You'd have Mexican silver flooding the Philippines, and these examples are from Ilocos. And then you'd have the grandeur of Manila examples. For example, this one in Santo Domingo in Intramuros, right? So you would have all of these highly decorative styles, but you'd have them already meeting with structural forms that date from hundreds of years before them, right? So this one is in Tayabas in Quezon. So it's the same thing. You would have a barrel vault ceiling that was added in the 1850s, but previous to that, sorry, I sort of did a montage because at the time that I took this photo, there's no such thing as panoramic shots for phone cameras. So bear with me, but you'd still have the same form, the rafters here, and then the top chord here, and then you'd have a series of bottom chords right here, there. So that crosses it. So if after the quarantine you can actually travel, please go to Tayabas and look at this marvel of of construction and engineering. It's just fabulous to be able to enter into the roof of a building, but you can actually do so in Tayabas. You can just ask for permission. So you have that, but what you have are all of these corbels sticking out. They're beautiful. They're very ornamental. And closer up, you can see that they do have all of these very 18th century carvings onto them. Now, this is how you know that the ceiling wasn't really this. The ceiling was much higher. The ceiling would have been in accordance with the diagonal of the uh, of the rafters, and that would have exposed these corbels out into view. And upon closer inspection of one of the corbels, they would actually have had color. So when you look up, you remember those Spanish examples from the Cathedral of Teruel or from the Canary Islands with all of that beautiful color. If you looked up in the Philippines in a church of the 1700s, you would have probably seen somewhat the same interpretation, somewhat the same, but of a local interpretation, right? So downstairs we have this. So this is the choir. And you would also have those beautiful corbels sticking out of the walls, holding up the choir loft. And this entire construction also reminds us of Spanish variants and some Latin American variants for horizontal floors, right? So you would have the same technique. It's really not very oriental, actually. So you'd have more or less the same technique happening. And this one is in the Episcopal Palace in Cebu. And then you would have Paete in Laguna. And you'd have this beautiful, beautiful railing for the choir loft, but also you'd have all of these beautiful corbels that hold up the choir. And this is pretty amazing because it's a series of corbels. I mean, it's something that is very, shall we say, it's luxurious to have 1, 2 corbels, and then that would hold on to the main structural element holding up the rest of the floor, right? But what's interesting is what's on that corbel. It's a crocodile. So this is one of the things that Ricky Jose would actually point out to us whenever we did our field work, all of these strange things. But it's very highly Philippine version of the Baroque. Somewhere near the altar, you would have also what is called the tribuna. So from here, the priests could actually be able to go out. It's connected to the convent. They can actually observe the mass from there. They can hear mass or just observe the people. And this lattice work prevents them from actually being in full view of the crowd underneath them. So this tribuna would also be the same as, let's say, lattice works, the lattice work in the choir loft of Santa Ana in Manila. So you can see how tall this lattice work is. If I'm not mistaken, this is Dr. Jaime Laya. So you can just measure it from the height. Dr. Laya is not a small person. He's actually a tall person. And this goes up to almost his shoulders. So it's that idea of preventing people to actually be seen. So this would have a more florid interpretation in a lot of the Cebuano churches. So it gets morphed into something else, right? So here are some Cebuano variants. I think from here, I think I will soon be going back to the regular slides. This is in Pakil, just to show you how that carpentry also happens outside. So you're looking at the protruding portion of the convent structure, which in a lot of documents from the 19th century would be called a galeria volada. It would be translated to a flying balcony. So all of these flying balconies would shut out 1 or more meters from the wall, from the masonry wall, as if they were floating. So most of this row of posts were actually, the row of posts was actually added afterwards, possibly when they were seeing that the entire thing was sort of leaning downwards already. But you can see how the corbels shut out, and they would sort of carry part of the weight, right, of the upper floor. So that would be a means of actually creating a more elongated projection, right? So you would have that series of corbels as a means of just pushing that gallery out, right? So anyway, I think I have to go back again to this is me, and I'll go back, I'll share the content. I hope so far it's been okay. I just have a couple of more slides to show you. Just have to look for it. Just a couple of more slides. Please bear with me, and I'm very sorry that we started late. Okay. So, hi, sorry. Sorry about that. Am I back?
Miko, it's all white.
It's all white, right? Okay, that's strange. Okay, it says I'm already sharing something, but nothing is sharing. I'll leave and I'll rejoin you. Okay, so I think that should resolve it. Sorry, keep the conversation going as I resolve it. Hi, it's still all white, right?
Yes, yes, it's white.
It's just white. Okay, one more time. Sorry.
Okay, while waiting, to all our participants, you can send your questions in the Q&A box. So for questions, please go to the Q&A button, which is also found in the lower portion of the screen.
Okay, it's still white. Okay, sorry. Wait a minute. I don't understand this. Ramil, can you help? Because I'm trying to share content. Okay,
We can see you.
There you go. Okay, I'll try to send it again. Hello.
Hi, Miko.
It's kind of still white, right?
Yes, yes, it's still white.
Okay, I don't know what's happening. It's yes. There you go. I'm back. Is that right? So you can see it now.
It's
Okay.
still white.
It's still white? Oh, wait a minute. Because I can see it on my screen. Share content. Started screen sharing. Oh,
Okay,
so
someone can see it now. Someone can see it.
yeah, somebody can see it.
They
Sorry.
can see it now.
Okay. Oh, wait, I can't see it.
Actually, it's white on my screen.
It's white on your screen. Okay. Okay. Can somebody say if they can see it? Okay. I get a message that it's working. Okay.
Yes,
Thank
it's
you. Thank
working.
you.
It's working for the
Thank you
others.
so much. Yeah. So we've seen this, right? So this is from the blockhouse. And then, okay. Now we already saw this. This is from Tayabas. And this is also from Tayabas. And we also saw this. We saw these examples. We saw the tribuna. And then we saw this. This is the last one that we saw. I hope everybody is still okay. So this one is construction technology. Just to breeze through this, so we can sort of get a bird's eye view of what was happening construction-wise in the Philippines from the 17th to the early 20th centuries. Bear with me, this won't be more than 5 minutes. So you would have like bahay kubos in the beginning, right? So this is from Brambila, the Malaspina expedition. And then you'd have that bahay kubo sort of like morphing. It's already melding in with a more Western kind of construction. So this is from the book of Fernando Sialcita and Martin Tino, the late Mr. Tino, right? So in Intramuros, you'd already have things like this going on. This is the Consulado building. And it's, as you can see, it's all masonry, but it's pretty disastrous if we have all masonry buildings, right? You can see the all masonry buildings here crumbling to the ground, whilst the Bahay na Bato would still be up, right? Because it's much more pliant. It just moves with every wave of an earthquake. And then you would have this development already in the 19th century, that houses are actually getting taller and taller and taller, and more slender. And houses could actually go up to 3 floors or even more. So you'd have this balloon frame technology happening already in the 19th century. But you'd still have all of these possible links to an older style. So you'd have, for example, in the bottom right part of your screen, you'd have a photo of the gallery in the Casa de Torre Tagle in Lima, in Peru. And then you'd have in the main part of your screen the San Juan de Dios Hospital in Intramuros with those characteristic galleries, right? The Galerías Voladas, or we just shortened it today as Voladas, right? And then you would have this. Okay, so this is in the Neo Mudéjar style already. So this was the Bank of the Philippine Islands in Manila way back when, right? So this is already gone. But oh gosh, so sorry, a lot of my slides got compressed. So anyway, just to sort of sum up this discussion, I've put these 3 points, right? So the question is, did the Mudéjar get to the Philippines? And that is still something that we're opening up, because up to today, not a lot of study has gone into it. But thanks to people like Chi Fadriquela and Dr. Gigi Garciano of LaSalle, they are looking into the properties of roofs in the Philippines, particularly in churches. And they are also documenting all of these carpentry traditions in the process. So you have a group of people who are already sort of working, but indirectly, to contribute to the research of this, if the Mudéjar did get to the Philippines. Then the second point is the structural solutions are fitted to the Philippine setting? Yes, because it's a lot of carpentry, and we did have a lot of wood. Past tense, did. We don't have a lot of wood now. We have more people than wood, probably. So that structural system is actually very, very fitted to the Philippine context, because you had communities that were surrounded with wood. So the carpentry traditions were actually sort of imported into the Philippines by way of Mexico. And you'd have Western carpentry traditions, but they already mix in with Oriental solutions, especially in the joineries, in the smaller details of the carpentries, right? And then the third is that it sort of forms part of a national style that was widely diffused all over the then Philippine territory. So if you would have the basic building types being the bahay na bato and the massive church, right? So the bahay na bato would be translated from not just a house, it was going to be translated into a municipal building. It would be translated into the convent. It would be translated into a lot of different buildings, building types, but using the same type of construction. And then you would have on the other end more monumental ecclesiastical constructions using the same language, the same structural language. So in the end, I say the then Philippine territory during the Spanish occupation, because you would have the same tradition stretching out all the way to the Micronesian islands, all the way out into Guam. So you would have sort of national style developing in this context, also because they were looking at the materials that were readily available to them, and one of it was wood. So I guess with this, I'd like to end with this slide. So this slide I think is very, very important, and I think I'll go back. I will revert again to the screen, to the big screen. Sorry, because I can't animate it from here. So this is the Bale Pinawit. So this is the house of the David family, Professor Randy David, Bishop Ambot David. This is their family house. So this is in Betis in Pampanga. But look at the bottom part of your screen, Betis, Pampanga, 1906. So you saw the Church of Betis earlier, and the Church of Betis also had that characteristic a frame, right? So inside, it's sort of, the house sort of looks like this, but while I really can't play the video, now I'll have to direct you to the screen again. So let me just set it up for you, so I can sort of play it. Okay. Ooh. Okay. This is the last slide. So I'll just stop sharing this and direct you all to the screen right there. And this is the banguera of the house, right? And just watch as the entire thing pans out and you see the rest of the house. So these are the walls. You see very American period walls with already that prefabricated wall material. So this is already in the 20th century, but look at how they developed the roof. So this is the long view of the house. And when you look up, voila, you see exactly the same, but in bamboo. So it's not just a local interpretation. It uses the materials quite elegantly also. So anyway, that's it. I hope everybody's still alive. I hope everybody did enjoy what I had to present. And I'd like to first of all thank the Intramuros administration for hosting this webinar. And also I'd like to thank a lot of people who contributed to this. First, I'd like to thank Jorge Loizaga in Mexico, but I wouldn't know Jorge Loizaga if I don't know Coach Zialcita. So Fernando Zialcita is, wow, one of the main people that had shaped me to what I know today. And also there is Professor Ricky Jose and everybody else in UST's Center for Conservation. But most of all, thanks to all of you for your patience. And I hope quarantine ends soon so we can all see each other physically and laugh and eat out and have coffee again. So thank you so much, and I'll entertain questions as they come. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for the presentation, Architect Miko. We'll now go to the Q&A portion. No? So first is, does the design geometry or geometry help in building these churches?
At that point in time, yes, that was the basis of everything. So if geometry did not exist, then they wouldn't have a standard. So their standard was based on geometry. It wasn't like the manuals or the treatises from the middle of the 18th century. So you're looking at the 1750s and onwards. You're looking at more detailed calculations already, especially for roof trusses. You're already looking at forces, you're already looking at loads. So it's the structural engineering approximating what we actually know up to today. But at this point in time, when all of this was constructed, they relied on geometry. It wasn't a lot of like mathematical computations. It was geometrical forms that had helped them determine if a building was going to be stable.
Okay, relative also to the question.
Yes.
Is it also design which help the buildings withstand powerful earthquakes?
Yes, actually. So you do know that Spain is also a country that that gets earthquakes, right? So the solutions that it had were also being developed for earthquakes. So you would have you'd have that simple form. So remember, I was discussing with you earlier that it would push out, it would push the walls out, which was why they added the horizontal members just to clip it together to prevent it from pushing out. So that would be sort of the solution, sort of the structural solution that they had developed back then, and it would also respond to earthquakes. Yeah.
Okay, and then again, related to that, what accounts for the variation in the styles?
Sorry, can you say that again?
What accounts to the changes in the variation in the style?
Oh, the variations. Wow, there's a lot that would contribute to the variations. You would have variations from one city in Spain to another, from one region in Spain to the next, and you would have a variation, huge variations from Spain to Latin America, and from one part of Latin America to another. And then you would also have variations from Latin America to the Philippines. And then maybe if we do study this a little bit more, you'd find more nuances between buildings in the Philippines that would have the same manner of construction. Like, for example, the one that I was telling you, you would have a lot more wood in the trusses of churches in Ilocos as compared to, let's say, the church in Tayabas or the churches in Cebu. So it's really geographical. That's one factor, and also another factor would be the changes in styles, in architectural styles, in ornamentation. So you saw earlier that there were variants that were very plain, as opposed to variants with very rich geometric lace work, and then variants just have like simple painted surfaces. So that would also account for changes in styles, would also account for variations in this case. So you'd have like geographical, and then you'd have the style, which is attributed to time, the lapses in time. Yes, are there other questions?
Okay, yeah. Yeah, okay, thank you for that. Now, so we still have more questions here. When did Mudéjar style started in the Philippines?
Wow, that's a good question. So yeah, I do think I showed you a slide from San Agustin, and that would probably be one of the earliest mentions of the ceiling of that carpentry work tradition. And that would be from the time of the second monastery. We don't have records from the first monastery, but we do have records from the second monastery, and that would be from the second quarter of the 17th century, so roughly about 1620s. So at around that time, you would already have had the carpentry tradition kind of in place. Why? Because also of what was happening in the capital. So you do know that in the 1580s, there was a conflagration in Manila. So the entire city burned to the ground. So it had to be built in stone. But then stone would eventually just get toppled over with earthquakes and all of that. So they would then have that hybrid of the style, which introduces which mixes carpentry and stonework together, right? So that would already have had the Mudéjar would already have had an impact on that time. So you're looking at possibly maybe the late 16th or the early 17th centuries.
Okay. So we have a question from our Facebook Live.
Yep.
I noticed that the Mudéjar tradition architecture did not change a lot throughout the years, as shown in many of our culture's architecture, where it has been adapted. Can this be explained by the fact that the universal function of spaces in church architecture did not change at all essentially? Can you comment a bit on the correlation between stylistic evolution of the Mudéjar style or tradition in architecture vis-a-vis the function of church architecture as a place of worship? Can the Mudéjar style or tradition in architecture be better understood or appreciated vis-a-vis the function of church as a place of worship?
Mm-hmm. Well, okay, I'll try to do that. That's a very broad question, right? So
Okay.
you're asking about the correlation of an architectural style to the architectural program. I think the answer would be very basic. The program would always dictate how you develop the spaces within, but then the style in which you build would really vary. So I mean, if you were following, one of the slides that I showed you was that of the cathedral in Lawag, and it had a very beautiful uh, timber timber work roof, right, with all of the logs, all 400 plus of them. But that was subsequently changed to steel. So you still have the same architectural program happening, but you can have a huge variation of structural systems that would address it. But the basic point would just be to be able to hold a large flock within a space, and with the central focus on an altar and on the retablo at the back. So that would be the basic program for the church. So any which way you roof it over, you wall it up, that would be dependent on the resources, the prevailing style. That would be dependent on a lot of factors. Like for example, in the New World, at the point of contact with Spain, in the beginning, they could not hold services in enclosed spaces because most of the local people in the New World were used to having their religious activities outdoors. So they had to devise a way of making open air services. So they had what they called their open chapels. It was basically just a shed for the priest and a huge field that had a low wall surrounding it. So that was called an open chapel. So the program stays the same, but the solutions are different. So the styles would also change, the technology would also change, but the program would still remain the same. I think that's part of the comment lodged within that question, that the program is constant.
Okay, so we still have 4 more open questions here. Was the Mudéjar style used in other types of buildings aside from churches and
Oh,
houses?
yes, definitely. If you see in Spain, I showed you a slide that also had a synagogue. So it's a Jewish place of worship. So it could be applied to houses, to churches. The solution for the roofs could be applied to like storage houses. It could be applied to almost anything. The beauty of it is that, as I was telling you earlier, as you transmit the knowledge, as you carry on with the knowledge of how to construct, and towards the latter part, as you manualize, right? When you put all of that down into writing, then you would already have a set of specifications. You'd already have a set of standards that you can use for different kinds of building typologies. So as I was mentioning earlier, for example, the bahay na bato would be used not just as a house, bahay, right? So basically it was developed for house, but then it was also used as a government building, right? It would also be used for church buildings, right? So you would also have convents and monasteries made in this style. So you could use a specific manner of construction and translate it, use it in different architectural programs and building typologies, definitely.
Okay, so we'll entertain another question from FB Live. Did Baroque architecture originate from Mudéjar since it became popular during the late Reconquista period?
Oh, nothing to do. Nothing. Yes, very far from it. But I think what sort of could have caused this idea, what could have planted this idea, was that what I am positing in this session is that maybe, just maybe, the structural part, meaning to say the carpentry, the structural part got here, but the ornamentation, the geometric patterns did not. So what we were doing was taking the structural part, but imagine you're painting. So the canvas is Mudéjar, but then what you put on the canvas is not. So it could be of another style from a different period, totally.
Okay. Two more questions. Can
Okay.
Mudéjar style be used today in building houses and buildings?
Good Lord, yes. There are people who actually specialize in still making these roofs. So if just put it on your YouTube search, and there are a couple that will come out. What's nice is, as I was telling you, is it's that it could be prefabricated. So you could actually just fabricate the parts with the proper, sorry, I couldn't go into details, but there are there is a specific set of like triangles with the specific angles, right? To be able to put together all of these joineries, right? So that's what they used before, the cartabones. So yes, the answer is yes. People still do it. People, some people go to the extent of buying old pieces and reassembling them into in their houses or into their government buildings or something like that. So the answer is yes, for as long as maybe you still have wood uh, in your midst, then yes, you can still use it, but don't use a lot of wood.
Okay, actually, relative to that, to that question, I remember that you have this prototype that you did before when you were in the skeletal year that you now use that the skeletal year is using now as a
As
conference
a
table.
conference table, yes, yes, actually, yeah. So that was just a small exercise on how you can actually make a roof, but table-sized roof. So yes, it could still be made with the proper tools.
Okay, another question here. We have another one just entered now.
Mhm.
If the Mudéjar style is used before, why are we not using it in today's standards of buildings?
Oh, well, that's interesting because, well, we just probably don't know it because we're not very much exposed to it. But I do know of somebody who does work in the Mudéjar. I don't know if he's listening in, Father Alex Bautista. Uh, he does have some churches that he worked on that do have elements of the Mudéjar. So try going after quarantine. Try going to one of the shrines that he built in Tarlac. I think I forget what it's called, but it's just right along the highway. And if you see it, it looks like a little Mudejar church. And then you enter, you have the geometric patterns painted onto the ceiling. It's actually fascinating. So yes, people still do work with the style, even here.
Okay, we have one question that just got in. Does the mix of styles among Christians and Muslims within the Philippines corresponding to around the same period as Mudéjar in Spain be considered local Mudéjar?
Gosh, that is a very tough question. I wouldn't want to answer it. I really wouldn't want to answer it. It's very difficult. You're talking about two very different geographical settings. You're talking about two very different uh, periods in time. So it would have produced very distinct forms of expressions also. So I don't think you can actually really correlate them. What is fascinating though is that it's interesting because it's a style that was created by former Muslims who had to convert to Catholicism in Spain, and then you have the last vestiges of it here in the Philippines when you would have also that encounter between the Christians and the Muslims. So it just went full circle. But style-wise, architecture-wise, I don't think we can really correlate it. Probably somebody would want to make a study. Why not?
All right. So, well, some of our viewers are also asking if you can also share your slides. Would it be
Oh,
possible?
definitely. Definitely. I can pass on the slides, but I'll try to pass on the slides that are not flattened so you can see the other photos because the other photos, that's why I kept on referring to the other computer screen because you can understand it better from the other photos. So I actually missed a lot of the other photos towards the end of the presentation. So yes, definitely I can share the slides with you.
Okay. There is this one question that was sent to me directly by one of the viewers. The
Mhm.
last home featured, I think this is the David house. Would
Yes.
that just be a local construction technique, which happens to be similar to Mudéjar? Isn't relating it to a Mudéjar technique a bit of a stretch?
A bit of a stretch, maybe. Yes, but as I was saying, this is something. This is a theme that it's a subject matter that hasn't fully been explored. So what we're looking at would be formal links, right, and more of structural links. So you'd have the same. I think what I made you look at was the roof and the ceiling, right? So it's that construction. If you look at the typical Bahay Kubo construction, it would not have developed a uh, a system with a collar tie and a bottom cord. This one clearly has collar ties and bottom cords. Normally, you would just have very simple rafters for Bahay Kubos. So maybe somebody who does specialize in Bahay Kubo construction could probably make the comparison because a lot of the Bahay Kubos that I've seen in rural areas of the Philippines don't have that that exact roof form. So this is something that already has roots somewhere else. So it's definitely not Southeast Asian.
Okay, so we have answered all of the questions now. So actually, we are already done with this lecture on Mudéjar style, and I think the question has been answered. Okay, so again, thank you, Architect Miko, for giving us this opportunity to
No, thank you for
this
hosting.
lecture. Mhm. And for the next lecture series, please stand by for our next lecture by next month. Again, we thank you. We thank everyone for attending this lecture series hosted by the Intramuros administration. Okay,
Okay.
so that will be all for now. Wait. Okay, I think this is all for now. Thank you and good morning.
Okay. Thanks, everyone. Bye.